Okay.
And okay, we are live.
Awesome.
Excellent. Uh, all right. So, um, so let's see how we want to do this. Why don't let's start with like a quick introduction about ourselves and like the stuff we do, and then we'll get on to like the main meat of the matter. You want to go
Sounds
first?
perfect. Sure. Yeah. My name's Dan Torrey. I'm the writer of Star Spangled Tales. It's a horror slash historical fiction comic series. Our first issue just came out, a collaboration between me and Rodrigo Magella, the artist that's working with me on the project. I've got some other writing projects in the works, but right now I'm in production on the second issue because the Kickstarter for the first one was successful. So yeah, that's me.
Okay. Uh, hmm. All right, so I'm Robert Webb. I am a YouTuber and author. I've written 3 books, and I'm currently in the process of making a sci-fi adventure comic, Babylon Rocker. You can find my novels as well as the audio version for my 3rd book, Inferior, on my website, which is studiobrainstorm.godaddysites.com. And right now, we're sort of in the process where we've gotten to we're starting on the pen lines now. Like we've gone through the concepts where we've got the first third of the pens, and from there it's the inks and the colors. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to make the promised Kickstarter deadline by mid January.
Oh, great! That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And yes, as promised, I did finally send off that promotional article I wrote about Star Spangled Tales to Iron Age Media, the website that I regularly contribute short stories to. So, I don't know how, because sometimes they often have difficulty processing things very quickly, so I don't know if it'll be a few days or a week from now, but it will be up on the site.
Well, I can't thank you enough for doing that article. I mean, you gave me a chance to read it before you posted it to the site and everything,
Mm-hmm.
and that was just very kind of you. And I very much appreciate you taking the time to do that. That was awesome, man.
Well, if there's one thing I've learned in this whole business, even as someone as antisocial as I am, has had to realize that if anybody these days wants to get their name out there and not be attached to like a big company, we kind of have to help each other out, form our own networks, as it were.
That's very true. It's very true. Yeah, no, and I'd be happy to. I don't really post regularly to any website myself, but I'd be happy to when your comic is all done to take a look at it and do a similar kind of thing.
Well, I would much appreciate that. Thank you. I'll be sure to send at least a digital copy your way, the same way you did for me. It was
Absolutely.
genuinely good, though. Oh, darn it! What Rodrigo's his name, right? Your artist?
Yes, Rodrigo Magella is his name.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about his particular sketchy style of art, but it does work with what you're going for, and I think he's got a lot of potential. So, and he looks like he's sort of new to this as we are as writers. So, I wish him the best of luck. Be sure to tell him that for me.
Oh, I definitely will. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know Rodrigo has worked on some comics before. Nothing like mainstream for like the big two as of yet, but
Yeah.
he's putting in the work, and I've been loving the art he did for the first issue and the stuff that we've got coming up for the second one. He's drawn
Mm-hmm.
16 of the 22 pages of the second issue story. So we're pretty deep into it now, and I'm glad you enjoyed the first issue.
Well, I just hope that you enjoy first issue of mine when it comes out. I already like the cover you've got for issue 2, the bit where Edwin Drake is sitting on the barrel of oil with Spangles holding the crown over his head. And it's just, I don't know why, but even though but it's just gave me this perfect impression of this is like the sword of Damocles. At what point does the other shoe drop for Mr. Drake?
Oh, well, I'm glad that you kind of saw it that way. That's definitely what I was going for. I actually based that image on an old American political cartoon
Oh.
portraying I think it was John D. Rockefeller, and he had the crown already placed on his head.
Mm.
And I like when I always like when I'm looking up cover ideas for Star Spangled Tales, especially I look through kind of old American political cartoons and propaganda posters because I love that kind of stuff. I just find it very interesting.
Mm.
So I ended up I was just Google searching for like Rockefeller or like oil industry political cartoons from around
Mm.
the time of Rockefeller, which John D was a little bit later than when this story takes place, but
Yeah, right.
um yeah, I thought it was appropriate to like have Spangle like putting the crown on his head to imply that sort of you know uh, that Spangle has one over on him. He's the one that has the real power, and like you said, any the other shoe could drop at any time. So I'm glad
Uh-huh.
it kind of portrayed that.
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
Because like I said in the first stream, the impression I get from Star Spangled Tales is this is basically it's a very much a classic Faustian bargain kind of thing. At some point, obviously Drake is going to reap some success from the deal with Spangles because Spangles promised him the American dream in exchange for his soul after he's dead. But of course, like all Faustian bargains, there's always going to be a twist to it. So at some point, it's all going to come crashing down for our poor man. And and it's not just because he was he didn't understand patent law as he did historically.
Yeah, exactly. The interesting thing with Edward Drake's life is, he kind of starts out his business career in a very poor position. He had some moderately successful business ventures that went belly up. He makes this incredible invention, and then after that, he kind of dies penniless and in obscurity because of his lack of understanding because of patent laws. So I'm obviously embellishing that a little bit. There's going to be more exciting
Oh
events
yeah.
than that, but I just if you read a little bit about him, you can kind of paint in the lines of where the Faustian bargain kind of would go wrong and all that stuff. So that's why I thought he would be an interesting, lesser known figure in the oil industry to write about. So for sure.
Okay, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but like in the very beginning of the chapter, I think Drake is like looking at what looks like a real political cartoon referencing the rail barons Vanderbilt, and I think it was his name Fisk. Was that a real cartoon? From historical cartoon, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. I took that cartoon, sort of portraying the rivalry between Fisk and Vanderbilt. They were two of the competing railroad barons at the time, and I did change, like I did add those speech bubbles, just so that it would be clear, to people who exactly it was in the drawing.
Oh, right. Because yeah. Okay.
So that's the only thing I really changed, but the image itself is a real political cartoon. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I don't know why, but like whenever I see these sorts of things, I'm reminded of this quote by what was his name, Boss Tweed, the famous political
Tammany
machinist
Hall
from
guy.
Tammany Hall. It was something I forget because there was this is around the time when political cartoons actually got started. So this is before the Civil War, I believed, when he was active. But basically, there was a guy in New York. He started making cartoons attacking him, and Tweed said something to the effect of, "It doesn't really matter what's written. Most of my constituents can't read, but those damn pictures." Yeah.
That's a great quote. I hadn't heard that
I
before.
don't think I don't think I got the quote exactly right, but he did say something to that effect. Because obviously, even before literacy, people can understand what an image says.
It's very true.
It's
Oh, sorry. Go
and
ahead.
sorry, and like even today, this applies to modern day memes, especially if it's like referring to something topical and relevant, you automatically get the context from what you're looking at.
I agree. I mean, I think modern memes, especially of the political variety, definitely kind of borrow from that old style of political cartooning for sure. And I've always loved, political cartoons because I love comic books, and I feel like, I studied political science in my undergraduate. I studied law. I practiced law for a time. So,
Right.
it's kind of like two of my great interests sort of fused into one. So I always found them really fascinating, and we studied a bunch of them in my undergraduate program when we would talk about like the fights that Andrew Jackson got into with basically everyone else in Washington about the closing of the
Oh, yeah.
the American National Bank, those
Right.
sorts
The
of things.
Second
So
National Bank.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Because, like, what was it? Jefferson refused to renew the charter of the first, and that was why that one died. I believe that was
believe
what
so.
happened. Yeah.
Yep. And
Yeah.
then Jackson, he was a wild man and
Oh,
did a
yeah.
similar kind of thing. And
He's just so over the top. You both, I don't know about you, but like I both love, hate, and love to hate Jackson all at the same time.
I think that's probably the best way to describe most people's kind of perception of him. If you actually like know a lot about his life,
Oh yeah.
he's a politician,
Oh
so
yeah.
he did do many contemptible things, but his life is an extraordinary story.
Yeah, he was like the first president to come from not just a non well off background. He started off in poverty. Because like all the founding fathers were like the presidents from the founding fathers generation: Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and I'm trying to remember number 5, Monroe. They were all either they were all like plantation owners, or they were like Adams was a lawyer, so he was in the professions, and Quincy Adams was obviously John Adams' son. So like, yeah, Jackson was number 7. And he was the first and so in that sense, he is, as much as he did a lot of bad things in office and even before, but with all the duelings and things and stuff, there is an inspirational aspect to his character, even as you have to acknowledge things like the Indian Removal Act, which is still one of the darkest stains in the history of our politics.
It's very true. And, one of the things that I didn't realize about Jackson before really studying him, both in my own readings and the stuff that I had to read about him in my undergraduate program, Jackson was basically the first populist American president.
Mm-hmm.
The Democratic Party that he started was designed to kind of appeal to the white working class people, grant them participation in the political system, because before that it was an elites game, like the folks that you were describing that drafted the Constitution were the founding fathers. I mean, those were the people really participating in politics, and even like the working class white men were not that involved in the political system. Jackson was the first guy to kind of go around, do stump speeches, campaign, and build a campaign of mass appeal for his candidacy, which seems like it seems like something that has always existed in American life, but he's kind of the guy that innovated that, which I find very fascinating.
I mean, if you look at like the history of how like the Parliament in Britain developed, like it's one of those things where, again, the institution feels like it's always been there, but you realize like pretty much from at least like from like the Civil War onward, its power, and it was all the ministers were just like stumbling about figuring out, okay, exactly what are the limits of our power, and especially in relation to the monarchy. And so like a lot of political systems, ours is a lot more what was the word? It was a lot more planned than British Parliament was, but there's still a lot of evolution and fits and starts as basically people try to figure out, okay, what exactly is it that we're doing here, and like is it what can we do, and is it right to do it? It seems that a lot, especially like if you're not doing a monarchy, you sort of, especially not an absolute monarchy, it is sort of a lot of experimentation in that regard when you're with how governance is going to work.
Exactly. And, you look at even some of the early developments of the American Republic, like the power of judicial review in the hands of the Supreme Court was basically kind of invented full cloth by the first justice of the Supreme Court. Like that was just the court declaring that it had this power. And everybody thought it was, or enough people, there were people obviously concerned at the time calling it judicial overreach, mainly people in like the Jeffersonian faction at the time. But those folks, but most people generally agreed that the power of judicial review was a good, check on the other branches of the government. So it is fascinating how these kind of things, political power is more fluid than I think people sometimes perceive it as being.
I think that's maybe because we conflate power with institution, and the institutions have been there since the founding of the country. But the exact nature of what their power is, even there's different, like, people still argue about how the Constitution ought to be interpreted on a lot of issues. I admit I'm more of a hardline textualist in this regard, but obviously I know that not everybody he thinks that way.
Yeah, exactly. And as someone that has, studied all of the various, judicial philosophies in law school and all that stuff, I'm not sure myself where, what camp I fall into. I'm more of a kind of a little column from column A, a little of column B, depending on what the specific, argument is. But it is fascinating how much, because people kind of assume, that are outsiders to the legal and political system that don't study it a lot. It's sort of, the law is the law. This is what it says. This is what it means. And oftentimes, the people passing the laws, the legislators, don't even know what the heck they mean.
Well,
it doesn't. Court,
it doesn't help that they. It doesn't help that. Sorry. I'm sorry. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's all good.
Yeah. It doesn't help that oftentimes they don't even. Sometimes some of them don't even read it, and even when they do, they pass these giant like yellow pages sized bills or policies and stuff. They don't let the electorate see it. And they certainly don't want to sign their names to it. That's actually one of the things that I have a bone with Congress these days, that they've pretty much abdicated most of their authority to the executive office. Like now, the president doesn't need Congress's approval to send troops out into the world.
Yeah, no, I
and I thought, wait, isn't Congress supposed to be the one that declares war and peace?
One would think. Yeah. One would think.
So we're sort of getting a little bit off topic, but a bit of a because I wanted to talk a little bit about our respective projects, but I also wanted to have this one be a little bit more about our shared interest in Robert E. Howard. But first, I do have a question I want to ask regarding Star Spangled Tales. Obviously, when you in the first stream, you talked about how you were very much in portraying American history in this new light through like the lens of this supernatural anthology series of Star Spangled Tales. May I ask why, of all periods, you decided to pick the Gilded Age? Because there are a lot of other periods of like political corruption in the nation's history. Why this particular period?
I did a lot of thinking about where I wanted to start this kind of story and get people into the horrific kind of tilt that you mentioned that I'm portraying American history through in these specific chapters of it that are dark and scary. And the idea came to me to use this kind of explosion of the American nation and get kind of emerging onto the world stage as the superpower. This is kind of the beginnings of it, obviously, the late 1800s. But I thought that would be a good place to start because it would speak to like who Sergeant Spangle is as an entity. Like he represents like all of the kind of the things about America that a lot of people are kind of uncomfortable with, and that comes, and a lot of those things come with being a global empire that has to do dirty things in order to maintain its position of power and authority. So the beginnings of the empire, kind of emerging as a global power was something that I wanted to portray, and I also think, the Gilded Age in a lot of ways has parallels with the kind of economic paradigm that we are currently existing in, and I thought that it would be, interesting to show people kind of that the times that we're living in are not as alien as one might think. Like this kind of wealth disparity that you're seeing now in many aspects of our society, it's a part of the DNA of the country in some ways. Not that there haven't been better times or worse times or whatever, And I'm not saying perfection is necessarily possible, like, and I'm not advocating for, like, resources to be evenly distributed across anyone or anything of the sort. It's
Because, I
just,
mean, who could you trust to do that fairly, even if it were possible?
well,
Because
exactly. I mean, that's why
to be
systems like
flawed is to
Congress
be
don't work.
human.
Exactly.
Sorry.
No, no, no. Sorry, I think there's a little bit of a delay in my stream here, so I
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's no, that's okay. I felt bad I was interrupting you for a second there, but
No,
yeah.
it often
Anyway,
feels like
that's
I'm interrupting you most of the time.
no, it's
Sorry.
okay. It's all good. But yeah, that's kind of like where my mind was at when I was picking the time period.
Hmm. Well, that's definitely interesting because, I mean, I think this is something I also sort of brought up in the early stream. The Gilded Age, like the post, like the sort of period between like the end of the Civil War and like maybe the World War One. It really was like a lot of the best and worst aspects of our country at the time, just blown up to exaggerated proportions. And a lot of American, a lot of the a lot of our values, both those and a lot of our negative aspects were like all in your face in those days. And you had all these larger than life figures, particularly in the realms of business. And of course, like you said, there are parallels that like the rampant corruption where we have big businesses making deals with politicians to basically squeeze out competition, because that's sort of how it works. I've often found like the thing that frightens, like people always say, "Oh, we just need to more laws, this, more regulation, that." Well, I'm thinking, well, if that's the case, why then do all these people, these big people who you want to take down because they're so rich and have too much power, why do they then support the kind of politicians that advocate these sorts of policies? If that's their kryptonite.
Yeah, I think the government and big business at various points in our history have been almost interchangeable.
Oh yeah.
The interests of both, like one of the stories that I want to tell in Star Spangled Tales eventually is the story of the Banana Wars, where the U.S. government basically invaded parts of South and Central America on behalf of the United Fruit Company, and so that they could have a hemispheric monopoly on bananas. Like even something as kind of innocuous as like the banana trade. Like there have been times when the
Yeah.
U.S. government has invaded and overthrown entire nations,
Yep.
for these people. Um,
And like,
so
sorry.
no,
Sorry.
no, I'm sorry, I was all set. No
Oh,
worries.
and yes, and so again, sort of the big problem is that yes, these guys use their money to have undue influence over policy, but as they say, one hand washes the other, and they wouldn't have been able to do that if there hadn't been politicians amenable to being bribed by them, to making backroom deals with them.
No, of course. And this is kind of one of the flaws of Republican forms of government. Politicians are always going to need people to fund their campaigns. You look at the history of like a place like Florence, the Florentine Republic that was dominated by the Medici for
Yeah,
decades and decades. They were
republic,
yes,
big air quotes.
yes. It was basically the Medici Imperium. Like all the important decisions of the city were made in their living room. They funded every politician regardless of ideology and party, to the degree that those existed back then.
Yeah.
And they rigged the elections, and it was openly known. Like the citizens of the city knew that these were the people calling the shots and making the decisions. Kind of like how, if you ask the average American today, I think most people, regardless of political ideology, realize that the politicians that they're voting for are not not where the true power in the country lies. It may not be, exclusively big business, industry barons controlling everything whole cloth, but there are a lot of politicians who are in office simply to serve the interests of someone who is not the person that the people that voted to elect them. And that's very much one of the flaws of Republican government. It's very easy if you have enough wealth, you have enough power and the means to put people in office. It's very easy to corrupt people. and take control.
Yeah, it's just like I don't know where, but I think I read somewhere that like this was like I think in Britain parliament like ministers like there's MPs I think at some point in like maybe the 20th or 19th centuries they had these things called rotten boroughs or pocket boroughs. I don't know exactly how this works because I only have a shallow surface understanding of the evolution of parliamentary history in the UK, but somewhere around this time, I think they set like limits on how much money an MP could spend on their campaign. And I think that still holds today. That might not be a bad thing to copy.
I agree. I mean, there have been bipartisan efforts over the years to kind of rein in the undue, in my opinion, influence that campaign financing has on the decisions politicians make. Like I know John McCain and someone else in the Senate when he was there before he even ran for president. It was like the early 2000s, or maybe it was even in the 90s. I can't remember off the top of my head. But there's been legislation proposed by bipartisan coalitions that the majority of the people of both parties don't support because that would destroy their ability to continue doing insider trading.
Yep.
Getting big fat campaign checks. But it's becoming such a problem in America. Like when I studied political science in my undergraduate degree, we did like a whole study on how congressmen at the federal level spend their time. And because Congress people are elected every 2 years, these people spend the majority of their time fundraising and not writing policy, studying policy, anything of the sort. And they spend most of their time cold calling people, demanding that people, give them money in exchange for being favorable towards legislation that'll help them.
Yep.
That's their primary function and role in the political system, which seems broken.
Yeah, talking about like bipartisan stuff that never gets anywhere. Congressional term limits.
That's another thing that no one will ever, no one in Congress will ever willingly give up, because it's like, I sometimes feel like a lot of these people that stay in office till they're like literally about to keel over, as you're seeing now, like some of the older folks like Dianne Feinstein.
What was his name? Strom Thurmond or something was there for into his hundreds, I think.
Yeah, no, he was there for a long time, and I think a lot of those people, like, they're just so mired in corruption that they're worried if they lose their political office, like, they'll be exposed and their enemies will come after them or something. I mean, I don't have any substantive evidence to support that, but it just seems like that sometimes to me.
Well, there's only so much that we can do, but at least it is nice to talk about these kind of things with someone who understands. I think another sort of big problem is the fact that it's education, and people are just not being taught civics or even really any decent picture of what the history of the country is anymore. Like, we used to have civics lessons, like not when I was in school. By then they'd gotten rid of it, but I know that like decades ago, people were actually educated on how the country is supposed to be in like the legal and the constitutional sense, and that's just not there anymore. And I have I think the feeling, again, if you had a more informed public, it would be harder, at least, for these people to get away with it. Because now, not only do we, sorry, I'm almost done. Because not only do we have corporate interest in America, we now have these international cabals who want to basically direct the policy of countries from these little from their little clubs, basically, because they figure, we are so smart and we have all these degrees and we have this wealth and influence, we can decide how to make the world a better place, as if you have any idea of how to do that than I do, or of the people who lived before us. Whenever I hear that sort of thing, I just think utopianism, and whenever I think utopianism, a little voice in my head starts screaming bullshit, bullshit, bullshit.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, you're talking about groups like the World Economic Forum and stuff like that. Like some of the stuff that comes out of there really troubles me.
Yeah, but these people, they've got all our best interests at heart, I'm sure.
That's what they'd like you to believe, for sure. But I totally agree with you about the the education piece. I think that's part of a function of just. I think there are many people in positions of authority that realize if you keep people uninformed as to how to like change society, and inform of the power that they actually have within the current political paradigm, they'll actually be able to do something about the problems instead of just complaining. But if you keep people like kind of uninformed and you know apathetic and out of the political system and just kind of like they'll just passively accept things because they feel powerless, you know.
And even if they do speak, what of it? It'll be just it may be 100 voices, but it'll all be 100 voices in the wilderness.
Exactly. So, I mean, I think I'm optimistic that in the future things could change for the better. I don't think all hope is lost or anything, but this is all the things that we're describing are why I kind of wanted to pick the era that the story takes place in, because it just when you read about stories from this time period about the way that American society functions, it draws a lot of parallels to the modern day.
Well, I mean, I admit that like I know that like intellectually that I should be reaching for optimism, but it's hard because I'm a natural pessimist, and so I'm kind of fighting myself to have that kind of outlook, even though I know it's the right one. Because if you don't believe that things can improve, you're like, what even is the point?
I mean, I'm totally with you. I mean, there are a lot of days where I find it difficult to be optimistic, especially living. I live in New York City now, and the city is in a very precarious place right now. The mayor is saying that the entire city will be bankrupt in 2 years if they don't fix some of the problems that are going on. It's just not a good. It's just not a good kind of situation. It almost feels like the city's society is kind of breaking down in some ways. In the same way that you saw things like this happen in previous epochs of American history,
Yeah, and like just for stepping out of line on one particular issue, you have like official wrath coming down on his end. Like the FBI raided what's his name? Eric Adams is the name of the mayor. I think the FBI raided his office about a month ago.
Yep, he was talking about how the immigration problem that our country at large has is kind of bankrupting the city, because they are legally the New York City, by state law, and not just state law, state constitutional amendment law, is required to house every homeless person within their jurisdiction. And the New York State Supreme Court expanded those protections even to people who are in the country as asylum seekers and illegal immigrants. So, for example, the city took in 800,000 people last year, and they were only able to build 200,000 new housing units to accommodate people. So it's a very precarious situation. And he spoke out about it, and then you're right. All of a sudden, the feds are coming to raid him.
I have an uncle who lives in like Batavian, New York, and he was like in like local government functions and administration for years. He's recently retired, but I think you'd like him because like obviously he has an understanding of state laws as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, like on the so let's move on from the somewhat depressing subjects of corrupt past and corrupt present to talk about the corrupt future of my comic, Babylon Rocker, where we basically just dispensed with even the pretense of liberty and self-determination, and we're basically back to medieval overlords in space. You got any further questions for me since last time?
Let's see. Since I haven't.
I know. Well, mine is yet to come out. I'm sorry.
Oh no worries at all. I understand. The timeline for this stuff. It takes time to do the art and everything. But what was your kind of main historical inspiration? Like I know you said like medieval lords and and all of that stuff. You're kind of doing a monarchical take on spacefaring human civilization government, with all that. what were your primary like historical influences? Were there specific historical figures that you were looking at when you were developing, like, I don't know, like the main players of the world in that sense?
I can't really say I can point to a specific historical inspiration. My main reason for making the setting this way was that, again, the idea of like, that there will be aristocracy in space, that's been around since like the pulp era. Like when Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote his first Barsoom story, it's
Right.
titled The Princess of Mars.
Right.
And so you have like these chieftains and stuff ruling these various polities on Barsoom. And this sort of like expanded outwards, like when Asimov wrote Foundation. It was because he wanted to do, like I've said this before, he basically was a big fan of Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and he just wanted to do a sci-fi take on that. The main, I guess really the only thing that I can say is that I looked at these sorts of things and I think I did mention this to previous streamers, like, has just no one explored how that kind of like sci-fi feudalistic system would work and how it would come into being and what kind of beliefs would underpin it. And the thing is, because the thing about this, as terms of like specific cultural examples and historical examples, for me, one of the things that I decided early on was I decided I wasn't going to have any aliens in Babylon Rocker. There would just be humans and like the uplifted primates like Julius. Mm-hmm. And the reason I did this is because, and I think like I did a small video about it. I called it sort of the anti-inspiration because I'm a big fan of the Mass Effect game series.
Those games are great.
Oh yeah, and I realized like the companions are great because this was at a time when BioWare still knew how to write good characters. But I always noticed the humans were always less interesting than the aliens. And I think this was, again, because in a lot of sci-fi visions of the future, because, Mass Effect was kind of like an homage to both Star Trek and Star Wars and a lot of other early, like 20th century sci-fi. It's always just the assumption that it's going to be us, but in space, the future civilization. Right. So there are going to be like multiple planets with like different cultures and even different takes on neo-feudalism that the main characters will be experiencing. And like some will be rooted in old Earth cultures, others will not be. They'll be just weird, bizarre stuff because I want to try and see if I can like make some versions of humanity look just truly as bizarre and alien, for lack of a better term, as any extraterrestrial.
That's a really interesting task. Like, so thus far, do you have any kind of ideas for what the completely, I don't know if inhuman or like alien sorts of variants of human culture, do you have any ideas for how
I've got a couple
and all that? Nice.
Well, I can I've got like mostly just a few notes scribbled away, well, metaphorically scribbled away in this big this sort of big page document that I just theatrically like to call the Babylon Rocker Bible.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so, like, for example, a couple of the factions that are sort of going to be recurring themes, one of them, this is a favorite of mine, are what's called the Earthers, because these, at one point, they're one of the major religions in this future is like based around environmentalism. And at one point, the first emperor of the Sol Hegemon, who were sort of the big bads up until the revolution at the very beginning of chapter 1, because you've seen like some of the promotional art that depicts this, he basically was both insane and a fanatical devotee of this particular belief, and he basically commanded that all the people of Earth should leave it so that the planet can heal itself. And when they refused, because how do you possibly transport billions of people off of a planet even if they wanted to, he basically just unleashed a super virus that killed over 80% of the population. And basically, and then he basically forced the remnants to basically into a kind of exile. His son assassinated him for that afterward, because obviously that's not a good look for the new dynasty.
Right.
But even like the son refused to let these people return home, and so these became the Earthers. They're these very, very hostile, very clannish groups that move about in migrant fleets most of the time, a la the Quarians. and they basically very much hate everybody else because no one lifted a finger to help them when this was done to them. And so they and
Oh,
because a lot of they had to leave their planet leave Earth very quickly. A lot of knowledge was abandoned, and so they're also trying to like recover the remnants of what their old cultures used to be. And oftentimes what they know is just so little. It's basically almost like a parody of what their ancestors once were. And so there's
interesting.
and so it's both kind of sad but also kind of messed up. But you can also sort of understand where they're coming from after given what happened.
Yeah, definitely. I really like the idea of people with an incomplete picture of their past trying to emulate that past and not exactly succeeding in recreating the past because they don't have all of the knowledge, but doing some kind of that making something almost new out of it at the same time.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's and I just basically figured that a great way to like do some of the Earther cultures is I'm going to base them off of like contemporary Earth countries and stuff. But I figured this way I can basically use like the kind of shallow stereotypes that most outsiders think of these people. But because this is all that the people have left, that's basically what all they have to base a way of life on.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly.
And there will be some that will like lament it because like, oh, this is we know so little about who we once were. This is all we are. This is all we seem to be sometimes, a caricature of a once great legacy.
That's really fascinating. So do you anticipate telling like entire stories where the crew visits these planets and kind of like lives amongst them for a while, or will they be
Oh yeah,
you know
they're basically freighters. They're the main way of making their living is transporting goods from world to world and
right?
colony to colony. So it's a perfect excuse for that sort of thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, I'm excited to see that stuff when you
Yeah,
eventually get to
there's
it.
actually going to be because like sometimes Earther populations among the migrant fleets become too big, and so some like will establish colonies on other worlds. And in fact, in the second storyline, because like this first storyline is going to take maybe 3 to 5 chapters at least. The one after that is going to be where the crew will meet a sort of a colony that was established by Earthers on this one planet.
Oh,
And
very cool.
basically, this is going to be these Earthers will be Japanese. These,
Oh, interesting.
yeah,
That's cool.
and basic. Sorry, there's like a few other interesting details I want like things about the technology that I'm willing to talk about. This I had this I don't know why, but I had this weird idea for it at one point, and I wrote it down. Is that in the future for the like theater and the dramatic arts, people have invented these masks that you put them on, they project holograms so that you will look exactly like whatever character you are portraying. And so you don't it doesn't matter what the actor looks like if they can get a role on pure acting ability. It's
Interesting.
something that I imagine a lot of people kind of wish they could do today, frankly.
No, yeah, of course, definitely.
Yeah.
No, that's really cool.
Yeah. Like I said, I think I've said this before or somewhere. Or maybe not in the previous stream, but like Babylon Rocker for me is more of an excuse to just pay breathless tribute to all the things I love about science fiction while trying to organize them into coherent stories. Whether or not I'll be able to succeed, I cannot yet say. I just hope that I can just do my best and hope for the best. Though again, I'm a natural pessimist, so that part is tricky.
No, I hear you. I mean, it can sometimes be difficult to overcome your the negative aspect of like your ego or whatever, where you're like, oh, like, am I good enough to be writing this story or whatever? Will I be able to kind of like make it into something that other people will find as cool as I think it is, you know? So I can totally understand where you're coming from, but I do think you're on the right track. I mean, I'm working on a high fantasy series right now. The first issue is already written.
Sweet.
Yeah, I submitted the script into a comic writing contest, so I'm hoping that we do well. I had Rodrigo do some concept art for us, and He did the cover of the first issue already, so I got to see the characters that I was thinking kind of rendered in artwork form, which was really cool. But the when I was writing that series, I sort of did the same thing as you with your sci-fi idea, where it's just kind of everything that I like about the various fantasy things that I'm a fan of. Like
Mm-hmm.
Conan the Barbarian was probably the heaviest like high fantasy genre influence, but there's some Star Wars in it
Mm.
because Star Wars is just
Yeah, it's
fantasy
science
in a space.
fantasy. Yeah.
Exactly. There's some Warcraft influence in there. Some Elder Scrolls. Like video game stuff that I
Hmm.
like. So it's got aspects of all of those kind of worlds and characters in it, and I think that's the only way to go about writing. These kind of fantasy or sci-fi stories, to take the things that you like and kind of mash them together until they become something unique and different in their own right.
Hmm. Like it basically, in the end, all we can do is our best with what we love.
Excuse me. Yeah, no, exactly.
Does Rodrigo like have a portfolio? Because maybe I like to see what this cover art for your entry looks like.
Oh yeah, definitely. I have the cover up on my personal Instagram right now. I don't know if Rodrigo has posted it, but I can see if I can send it to you here on Skype right now.
Oh, that'd be
See if I
nice.
can attach the file. Yeah. Let's see. But anyway, yeah, the story is called or the series anyway. It's called The Legend of the Octo Knight.
Huh. Legend of the Octo Knight. Right. That's
Yeah.
definitely a very pulpy one, but for some reason it just brought to mind something. Because one time I was reading this Star Wars book by Michael Reeves, and apparently for some reason and I looked into his bibliography, and there was this weird title that he worked on called "Thong the Barbarian and the Cycle Sluts of Saturn." And I thought, what?
That's
Like
hilarious.
like effing what?
That's amazing.
But like that man must have had stones to basically say, "Oh yeah, this will be a great title."
Oh, I know. I
Uh,
can't even. I can't even imagine.
yeah.
Like I'm a little more trepidatious than he probably would have been, but I know there
Yeesh.
are a lot of comic creators who do go for the kind of like the raunchy stuff
Mm.
sometimes. Which there's place for that if it's
Yeah.
done well enough. It's just not my thing necessarily. Hold on, I'm just
Oh, yeah.
gonna send this to you right
Yeah.
now.
And since we've brought it up, let's finally transition to what I was really hoping to like talk to you about for the stream: our mutual love of Robert E. Howard.
Of
So,
course.
um, is it fine to like talk about the Conan stories that you haven't yet done for Conan Chronicles?
Yeah, sure. Admittedly, I haven't revisited them as recently as like the ones that I had done stuff
Mm-hmm.
for. So my
Okay.
my my memory may be a little fuzzy on some of them because I haven't went back to them in a while. But yeah, I'd definitely be down to discuss them with you.
Okay, sure. Because I was like just worried that you maybe weren't didn't want to do that before like you've actually done your formal retrospectives. I think like we're all hoping that you come back to those soon because they really are excellent. Even as
Oh,
they get
thank you.
as they're getting progressively longer and longer with each story.
Yeah, I really want to do uh, the the rest of the Barsoom books too because I did one on the
Mm,
first.
yeah.
Edgar
Yeah.
Rice Burroughs, John Carter of Mars book. So I would love to, be able to do that, to do all of it.
Mm. So like I'll say, let me put this question because I know that just asking for your ultimate favorite would be too much of a headache. What would be your top three Conan stories that you can?
Let's see. Beyond the Black River is probably my favorite one. The one, where he's fighting the Picts.
Oh yeah,
I
the.
really like that one
Mm-hmm.
because of the themes about imperial conquest, the cycle of civilizations rising and falling, all of that kind of stuff. And I finally found the cover. I'll post it in the chat
Okay.
there. Um, but yeah, I would say that one. Zuthal of the Dusk slash the Slithering Shadow, excuse me,
Hmm.
is one of my favorites. I love the kind of fantasy. It reminded me of like how we're doing like fantasy VR, like these people live in a virtual like world of pleasure, and like I
Yeah.
thought doing that as like a magical high fantasy thing was really interesting on a conceptual level.
Hmm.
It's not as like dense or as in depth as some of the other Conan stories, but that's definitely one of them for me. And then I like Red Nails a lot. That's a great story.
Like it really is the thing. Like Howard's stories, he just kept getting better and better with each successive entry. And so, as much as I, like so many Sword and Sorcery fans, lament his suicide at such a young age, if Red Nails was indeed his last, it is a killer note to go out on.
Oh, it
It
is.
is because, like, even if there are some that I love more personally, it is undeniable that like his last Conan stories are arguably his best.
No, I agree. Hour of the Dragon is also, a very good one, and one of the best. I don't know, just kind of getting deeper into Conan's character just because it has more real estate to tell its story.
Yeah. So let's see. What would my top three be? They're like they're almost none of them really objective. Of this is all just personal love. I love Rogues in the House, especially.
That's a great one.
That because I just love how how Nabonidus just keeps giving Conan and Murillo shit once they find him after he's revived, and of course the iconic image of Conan fighting Thak, the ape man. Like
Yes.
that's a like what was the name of the artist who did a lot of Conan covers, who sort of cemented the artistic
Frazetta?
image. Frazetta, yes. There's it's like he did one of those and it's like one of the most iconic images in like the Conan media. Uh,
It
and
is. I
yeah,
mean, so much so that they pseudo adapted that fight scene into the second Conan movie.
yeah, Conan the Destroyer. Eh. I mean, I like the first Arnold Conan movie, but I just do not like the Destroyer. It's just not very good in my eyes.
That's totally fair. I really like the first one. It's obviously, there are things about it that I wish were a little bit more like the books in some ways, but just as a kind of as a fantasy movie from the 80s, I think it's really solid and I really do enjoy it. And the Conan the Destroyer movie, I get why at the time it wasn't as well received as the first one. It's definitely not on the same quality level, but I find it entertaining nonetheless. I definitely wouldn't put it up where there with like some of my favorite movies ever made, like I would with the first one. But you know I
Yeah,
get why people aren't as much of a fan of it though. That's totally understandable.
everybody's free to have an opinion. That's fine.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
anyway, yeah, Rogues Now is just great, and especially like how, at the ending where it looks like Nabonidus has them trapped, but of course he just has to talk on about it, and so Conan basically throws a bench into his face and just brains him.
Yep.
And this is why monologuing is a mistake, villains.
Yes.
It's like what was it? What's it called? The evil overlord list, where it's like this sort of joke that somebody like wrote up, like I will not do X Y Z because it gives the heroes the chance to thwart me, stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so that's so yeah, but yeah, that was still a great ending, and so that's one. Oh, ooh, we got someone in the chat to at our first one. Ah, yes, quoting Arnold's famous line before fighting Thulsa Doom's men. All that matters is that two stood against many. Grant me revenge, O Crom, and if you do not listen, then to hell with you. That really,
That speech
for
is
some
awesome.
reason, only Arnold in the '80s could deliver that and somehow not make it corny.
Yeah, it's really funny. Like, even when I was a kid, I always found some of his line deliveries in that scene really funny. Like when he's just like, "Grom, I have never heard you before." Like
Lol.
yeah, it's really funny. But it's still somehow epic at the same time. It's great.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Let's see. What would be another one? Oh, the Shadows of Zambula or the Man Eaters of Zambula. That is another one that I just love so much.
That's a great one
And
too.
once again, we have sort of a great mono moment where Conan goes in like basically a strangling contest with Baal Peteor, the guy from the strangler from Kosala, and it's just great. This sort of it really is. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like almost Titanic, even though it's just two guys trying to choke each other out. And they're not moving all
Hmm.
that much, but Howard just conveys so well the power and the strength these two men are exerting in their efforts to kill each other. It should be one of the most iconic moments in Conan, right up there with the crucifixion in A Witch Shall Be Born. Uh,
That's another one of my favorites. Is A Witch Shall Be Born. I really like that
yeah,
story.
but yeah, and of course I just love how when it's clear that Conan is like it's not that their grips are both equally powerful. It's just that Conan's neck muscles are more resistant to Baal Peteor, and
Yeah.
Conan is basically like, oh, I think I can still quote this from heart because I love the Man-Eaters of Zambula. You fool! I think you've never met a man from the West before. Did you deem yourself strong because you could strangle infants, girls, and old men, civilized folk with oak whose necks and sinews were like rotted strings? Break the neck of a wild Cimmerian bull before you deem yourself strong. I did that before I was a grown man. Like this, then crack, and he's dead. God. I think I kind of flubbed it a bit
Yeah,
near the
that's
end, but
that's some good
still,
stuff.
oh, Howard always knew how to write a great speech for his characters. And of course, another thing that makes it great
I agree.
is that the whole time, Nefertari, who's sort of like the mistress of the satrap of Zambula, while she's all pretending to be just this dancing girl, thinks she's leading Conan on the whole time because she's literally stark naked when Conan runs into her, and Conan's never been shy about his appreciation of a pretty figure. And so she figures she's leading him by the nose, only right up until the end, because she's trying to like save the satrap from this madness that's been induced by the ultimate big bad. What's his name? Totras Mech. Yes, I can remember these crazy names. Totras Mech. And recover this magic ring that the satrap had on him. But it turns out at the end, when Conan is riding out of the city, he's got the ring, and he knew that she was Nefertari all along. And so
Yep.
it's a great moment where like Conan and people so often, and I think in partly because of the Schwarzenegger film, people do kind of assume that Conan is just a brute, a simple-minded barbarian. But in a lot of stories, Conan shows that he's got as much brain as brawn, not intellectual kind of intelligence, but the intelligence to know how to survive. And and I do love the way that the ending of Man-Eaters of Zambula showcases this.
I agree. One of my favorite aspects of Conan's character is that if he's not an intellectual, obviously, but he's very cunning, and he, like you said, he has that kind of survival. I guess in modern day you would call it street smarts knowledge, in the sense that he knows how to outsmart people in his own way. I mean, he's in that, like, I think you're right on about the Schwarzenegger point. I think people, because Arnold is such a larger than life figure, is known for being a big guy, and his voice, makes him sound kind of like a, barbarian type, that people assume, Conan is that in the books, and he's not really. But hopefully we get another good, live action adaptation at some point that showcases that aspect of his character better.
I've nothing against like the 2007 or 2011 Conan film. My only beef was that one, there was not even that one, because again, I really would love a faithful adaptation of the pulps, and just like the Arnold movie, it doesn't really do that. And also the fact that Jason Momoa certainly had the brooding part down, but I think he was just a little too conventionally handsome to be Conan. Like whenever he's described, Conan is always described as being his features are like too brutal to be or to be handsome. And so even though it's like it's his like, I guess for lack of any better term, his raw animal magnetism, quote unquote, that makes him attractive to damsels, not his looks.
That's fair. I think Momoa is probably my favorite aspect of that film. I thought he was pretty decent
Yeah.
casting for it. I actually think it was like I'm a big fan of Peter David's run on the Aquaman title, because his kind of pitch was that was just underwater Conan,
Hmm.
and the book is like 40 issues of like Atlantis underwater high fantasy
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, Aquaman's a little bit more heroic than traditionally heroic than Conan is, because he's
Oh
still a
yeah.
superhero, but he does kind of have that savageness to him that makes him unique compared to a lot of the other characters in the DC universe. So
Yeah.
when they cast, the guy who had played, Conan as Aquaman, I was initially like, oh, this is a really great choice. Because he of course played the barbarian chieftain guy in Game of Thrones as well. So,
Hmm.
I thought, that would be good casting. The movies didn't turn out exactly as I would have liked. I think it was a little too, jokey and goofy for my taste. But
Yeah. I mean, there's also
uh,
the fact that by this point there are just so many superhero films. As much as a lot of like journalist types seem to deny it, no, superhero fatigue is very much alive and well at this point. We do kind of would like a change of pace, I think.
I agree with you. I mean, I'm a lifelong fan of the superhero genre. I mean, I want to work in comics because of my love of all of the superhero characters that I read, growing up when I was a teenager, and then, that I've continued to, read the books of, because the quality is, for a lot of those stories, is just great. They're just fun,
Mm-hmm.
fun superhero, adventure stories, and I love that stuff. But I'm with you. I mean, if you can turn off someone like me and say that this is enough, then
Yeah.
it's probably enough for most regular people, and has been too much and enough for them for a while.
Yeah, it's like I'm not saying that superhero films should cease completely. I don't believe in like bad genres or good genres. I think
Right.
just some have their day in the sun, and sometimes they get oversaturated, and we need a break for a while. Oh, like the Star Wars has got sort of the same problem. Disney just keeps pumping out new stuff, and none of it. Of course, the fact that none of it's really landing helps, but it's the same thing. When a new Star Wars film a new Star Wars property was announced, particularly like a film or a television, it was always like a big event. Now it's just, oh, another one.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's see. Oh, another thing in the chat. I think Dark Horse had adapted the novels. Oh, yes, Dark Horse did. I was speaking specifically in terms of film or television, but yeah, like both Marvel and Dark Horse have had their turns adapting the pulps. Like like what was his name? Because I've talked about him recently. Roy Thomas.
Yeah.
And that's because for over December, I've been doing a couple of streams where I'm looking into like the very first Star Wars comic ever written, which was by Marvel in 1977. In fact, the first two issues predate the premiere of A New Hope in theaters. And the interesting story I learned, because I love looking into the production of Star Wars stories before I start doing either streams or formal videos about them, is like how these things got started. And apparently Roy Thomas was the only one who believed that Star Wars was going to take off and that this comic would be successful, because Marvel was in some pretty bad financial straits in the 70s. No one else seemed to have believed that. Even Stan Lee, who, even though he'd stepped aside as editor-in-chief, he was still, he obviously still had a lot of influence, and he was skeptical about it. I like to imagine that Thomas had a hard time not being smug in the weeks following A New Hope's premiere.
I know. I mean, yeah, Roy Thomas, for those who don't know, I mean, he's one of the greats in comic writing in general. He created characters like the Vision in the pages of his Avengers run. I mean, he's one of the all-time great Marvel universe writers, but his primary claim to fame and his favorite thing to write were the Conan comics at
Yeah.
Marvel. He did the main series that started in the 70s, and then as that series was successful, they spun off into the black and white Savage Sword of Conan
Yeah.
magazine, which was kind of like the uncensored, much more leaning into the violence and sex that's in the pulps. Like it was kind of like Thomas and his collaborator John Buscema getting the censorship taken off of them, basically,
Mm-hmm.
just being able to do whatever they want. I mean, it's the Savage Sword of Conan. If you read those stories, they're incredible, because people credit comics like Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns with pioneering dark adult content comic books. Savage Sword of Conan was doing it in the 70s. I mean, it's great, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, oh yes, like everybody loves to just take credit for stuff that was already being done in the past. Clearly, we have forgotten the old saying, "There is nothing new under the sun."
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, that was the other big thing that Roy Thomas contributed to Marvel: Star Wars, but also Conan. And the color and like the initial color series was so successful that not only did it lead to the Savage Sword, and I've actually seen a few issues. It is phenomenal. Even though, like again, it doesn't really adapt too many of the pulps very faithfully, but still, it does get the tone right. And I think it's again because it's done in black and white. There's some things that color and black and white are just uniquely suited to that the other can't do. And Savage Sword was really good, and because of the success of the initial colored Conan comics, it not only led to the Savage Sword, it also created like a wave of sword and sorcery comics that other companies were trying to imitate because they saw, wow, this is taking off. We need to do our own thing.
Yes, and for those who don't know as well, one of the biggest kind of spin-offs from the sword and sorcery, comic magazine craze that the main Conan book and Savage Sword created was Red Sonja, who was created in the pages of the Conan comics by Roy Thomas. And I believe John Buscema was the co-creator, if I remember correctly. I think it was late enough in the run that he was the main artist, because it was Barry Windsor Smith for a while, and he's a legend in his own right. But John Buscema is the guy that's most associated with the Marvel Conan. Like if you look at any kind of like T-shirt that has art on it that's like the Marvel Conan, like that's his artwork. Kind of like how if you were to see like a Spider-Man. It's probably John Romita Sr. or Mark Bagley's artwork.
Yeah, and he died recently, didn't he, John Romita Sr.?
He did die recently, yeah. It was very sad.
Yeah. Like, again, I'm not nearly as versed in comic books as you are, but I figure, like, what the impression I got, because I saw a few tribute videos about him, clearly this man contributed a lot to Marvel, even if I still don't know the full extent of his contributions to Marvel and to comics in general, so it's always sort of sad when great creators pass from this world.
Yeah, so John Romita, he was the guy that followed Steve Ditko on The Amazing Spider-Man after him and Stan Lee. Steve Ditko was the creator of Spider-Man with Stan Lee. He and Stan Lee had a falling out, and he went to go work for another company. And then John Romita Sr. took over as the full-time penciler. He did a bunch of the classic stories, like the reveal of the Green Goblin's identity being Norman Osborn, a bunch of other very, very important and quintessential Spider-Man stories, and he basically stayed on that book, with some fill-in artists here and there until Stan Lee finished his run at issue 100. So it was a very long stretch, and then he became the art director of Marvel. So he was responsible for recruiting and teaching the new pencilers who would come into the company. Do corrections and redo stuff if need be, if it wasn't looking quite right. So he mentored an entire generation of people that came up through the Marvel Comics kind of apprenticeship system.
Damn.
Yeah, he was a legend. He's the man.
Okay, so yes, I've done the first two. The third from my top three, it would be definitely The People of the Black Circle.
That's a great.
That's the one
too.
where it's like Hyborian India and like the Himalayas, basically.
Yes.
And I think one of the main reasons that, one, it's one of the longer stories, and unlike Hour of the Dragon, which I do love, but Hour of the Dragon does sometimes feel like it drags a little too much. That's because it's clearly the search for the heart of Ahriman is basically an excuse for like almost like a very short world tour of the Hyborian Age.
Yes.
But whereas I think People of the Black Circle is a lot more tight and is paced a lot better. And I especially, I think one of the reasons I love it is that it actually has one of the love interests that's has a lot more personality than the usual damsels that Conan falls in with. What was her name? Yasmina, the Devi Yasmina. I think the only reasons that she's not nearly as iconic as, say, Valeria from Red Nails or Baylit from Queen of the Black Coast is because those two stories are just so iconic and famous within the Conan canon. Whereas, like, People of the Black Circle is great, but it's not usually spoken of in the same breath as these other stories. But I really do like that story, and especially like when Conan and like his reluctant allies have to storm the keep of the seers of Yimsha and all the crazy magical traps they have to fight their way through, and how eventually Conan overpowers the master himself. Oh, it's really great stuff. And I also, and the best, again, it's like in the end, it's one of the rare stories where Conan doesn't actually get the girl technically.
Yes, it's true.
It's clear that by this point that Yasmina has sort of fallen for Conan, but she still has enough of a sense of responsibility to her kingdom that she feels she can't just run off with him.
Exactly.
And I just love the exchange at the very end where like, I still owe a reward for my ransom. I will pay you 10,000 pieces of gold. And Conan looks at her, and you can tell like he's giving her the bedroom eyes as he says this. I will collect my reward in my own way, in my own time. I will collect it in your palace, and I will bring 10,000 men with me to see that the scales are fair. And she just shoots back, and I will meet you on the shores of the Junda River with 100,000. And then Conan just rides off into the mountains laughing. It's like again, Valeria and Baylit are great characters, but I really feel like Yasmina should get more attention and more love, frankly, as one of the great love interests of Conan.
I agree. I mean, I remember when I reviewed that story, she was a standout compared to some of the others, for sure. I'm maybe my opinion is a little basic. Baylit is still probably my favorite. And Queen of the Black Host is also, I mean, it's even hard to pick a top three because there's so many of them I really like.
Yeah, it is hard.
But Queen of the Black Host is, again, another one of my favorites, almost entirely because of her. I think Baylit is just a really interesting character, her historical basis, kind of like the pirate queen archetype that she was based on. There were real women that existed and lived their lives like that, which is fascinating. And pairing her up with a guy like Conan, I mean, they're like star-crossed lovers. I mean, that's his true love in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's certainly the only woman that he's ever really mourned. Though, of course, we never, obviously, unless you like read into like extended stuff, like the stuff that Sprague de Camp did, you never really see the stories where Conan, is separated from the other, the countless other women he meets. Baylit is really the only one that he mourns. And I kind of agree with you. Baylit is fascinating, but I think partly because, I don't know why, but like she always gave me the sense that there was something like something like her mind was not always in the here and now. And I think that does, I think, lend a bit of interest to her, but like the way that she that her dialogue is written, the way she talks, it sometimes feels like she's not entirely connected to the present as it is. Like when she talks about how the famous line, if I were still in death and you fought for life, I would come back, and not all the gods and all their hells couldn't stop me. There's like, it's almost like for lack of a better word, it almost seems like she's witch touched in a way. I don't know if that's the right word to say, but there's like something very off about Baylit. It lends itself to a great of intrigue and mystery about her, but it just never appealed to me the same way that a lot of Conan's other more developed love interests were.
That's totally fair. I can see exactly what you're saying. That kind of mysteriousness and the kind of ethereal way in which she speaks sometimes.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Ethereal. That's what I should have said.
Yeah, no, it does lend to that kind of mystery, and she almost seems like a force of nature in and of herself, and that's what I find interesting about her. But if that's something that doesn't appeal to you as a character, as much as it would to me, I can understand why you would feel that way for sure.
So let's see. Have you ever you've read obviously the Howard stories? Have you read into the other Conan stories written by other authors?
I haven't yet at this point.
I've only read a few.
Want to.
I honestly, but it's been a while, so I can't really compare them to Howard because I haven't read them recently enough to make a comparison. But I was surprised to learn how many people have contributed to a wider Conan media over the course of the decades. Like Sprague de Camp is the most famous because he was the one that really helped popularize Conan. I was surprised to learn that Robert Jordan, the Wheel of Time guy, wrote a lot of Conan stories at one point.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention Robert Jordan because I know he he did a lot of Conan novels, which I've heard from folks that have read them that they're really great. Because a lot of people, it's hard to kind of live up to the way that Howard writes stories from what I've heard from people that have read kind of like the whole canon, and you can see why. I mean, Howard is a very unique prose style. He learned how to write in a very different environment than a lot of the novelists that wrote the character that came after him. But in any case, I've heard that the Robert Jordan ones for a lot of fans are kind of like the closest we've gotten to approaching what Howard was trying to do with the character. A lot of people think Robert Jordan kind of knows the ins and outs enough to, do that sort of stuff, which is great to hear.
Yeah, that is good to hear. But I will say, obviously we're both big fans, and doubtless Howard has been a big influence on both of us. And like for me, it's obvious. The way that Howard writes action, I always try to think, how would he have done this when I do an action scene in like any book or short story that I'm writing? Because he was like he manages to convey so much with so few words. He was very economical, which is weird because he was friends with Lovecraft, and Lovecraft was like the exact opposite. He was
yes.
Like the few Lovecraft stories I've read, because again, I'm so averse to horror, which is your jam, but it's not mine. But I have read a little Lovecraft, and Lovecraft was very florid and verbose in his prose. There's nothing wrong with that, but like the way that Howard wrote was especially suited to very plot-driven, action-oriented storytelling, and I've always tried to like, for lack of any better word, imitate that style when I try to write action.
No, I remember one of my favorite descriptions of Conan action. I think it was in The Phoenix on the Sword. It may have been in a different earlier Conan story. But in any case, he describes Conan fighting with a battle axe, and he calls Conan's movements, he describes them as a wheel of death. And that image always struck me like very... like it was very memorable to me. I always think of that. It's like you use three words, and I know exactly I can imagine in my mind what that looks like in a very visceral way. But you're totally right. I mean, that's why Howard his stories were so impactful, despite being in pulp magazines, because he found ways to pack so much into the little real estate that he was afforded writing in that format.
It really does make you feel. It really does make you feel inadequate sometimes when you look upon these past masters, and like, how can we of the present possibly carry on this great tradition that they've bequeathed to us?
I know. It is easy to get intimidated sometimes, but at the same time, it's also like a wonderful learning opportunity where I go back and look at those stories and learn something new about not just the Conan character and the Conan universe that Howard created, but also like on a technical writing level. You're like, wow, I really need to like shut up sometimes and find a way to describe something, let the audience imagine it and move on to the next thing, rather than kind of dwelling in flowery descriptions and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like the different styles have their place. It's just the trick is knowing which style is appropriate for what kind of story you're trying to tell.
Of course, definitely.
If there's one thing I've learned as a writer, it's that it's not that there's like right or wrong ways to go about it. It's more like certain things just fit together better than others.
Exactly.
I should say different elements fit together better than others. And again, you sort of have to know what you're trying to do when you're starting a story.
No, for sure. I totally agree.
So let's see. On the subject of Howard, I'm assuming have you read any of like his other sword and sorcery characters?
I've read a couple of the Kull, the Conqueror stories, just because.
He's the proto Conan, basically.
Exactly. So I've looked at a few of those. I'm not like super versed in the character, but I have looked at a couple of those, and for the purposes of understanding the legacy of Conan, because like a lot of those call stories were eventually taken by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter and rewritten as Conan stories. They changed, the names and the
Yeah,
locations and the
yeah.
characterization a little bit, but kind of repurposed them as Conan stories so they could sell them. And Marvel also had a Call the Conqueror comic book series that Roy Thomas did for a while. It wasn't as popular as long running as the Conan series, but it was kind of like you said, one of the results of the success of the Conan line at Marvel. They wanted to adapt the other Howard characters. They did a Solomon Kane series as well.
Yeah. Roy Thomas, that man really seemed to have a better grasp of what would sell than other folks. Because again, much like with Star Wars, there weren't a lot of people that were convinced that a Conan Marvel series would pay off. And again, he was vindicated, triumphantly so.
He was.
He's still around, isn't he, Roy Thomas?
I believe he is. I don't think. He's obviously an elder gentleman now. I don't remember.
I don't think he's active anymore, but I do think he's still alive.
Yeah, let's see. I'm just looking at his. He is still alive. He's 83 years old at this point. I would assume he's either retired or just does things here and there.
Yeah.
Hey, it looks like
the stuff he's done, he's earned the right to.
Oh, 100%. It looks like the last Conan thing he worked on, he did a Conan Road of Kings maxi series. It was 12 issues in the 2010s. So yeah, he's one of those guys that was a mainstay at Marvel. He wrote that Conan series for upwards of 20 years. People talk about like Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men, where he was there for like 17 years, kind of building out the X-Men universe into what it is now, because they were never really popular. They were like a C or a D-list kind of entity in Marvel. Their series was canceled at some point, and he kind of revived it and made it into the kind of juggernaut that it became in the 90s as being the primary driver of the comic book market. Everybody read the X-Men by the time the 90s rolled around. But Thomas was really on the Sword and Sorcery, and he was the guy that made Sword and Sorcery into a viable and thriving genre in comics for as long as it's been.
Yeah, and without him, not only would we not have the Savage Sword, we wouldn't have what is still considered like the definitive comic run of Conan, the Dark Horse run.
Yeah,
because I've read that, and like that is just excellence. There are a few things that I don't like, but that's more like me nitpicking and being a source material Puritan, because there are some deviations. But otherwise, I think the Dark Horse, I kind of have to go along with popular opinion. The Dark Horse Conan are still the best, frankly.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes from, at least at the initial outset, Kurt Busiek was the writer on that series when Dark Horse first got the license, and he is also another legendary creator. He's done lots of historic runs on stuff like the Avengers at Marvel. He's done some DC Superman stuff. He's done his own like excellent creator-owned series called Astro City. So when he got on that book, I don't know how the popular sentiment was at the time, but I wouldn't have necessarily associated Busiek with Conan, because he's very much like the optimistic superhero-y kind of guy, but he did a fantastic job with it, and the art in those books is just top-notch as well.
Well, you're not going to hear me disagreeing on that front, even if I'd never even heard of this guy before today.
No, yeah, he's if you ever are inclined to check out any superhero stuff, he's definitely one of those guys that people really remember. One of my favorite things that he did was, I'm a big Spider-Man guy. He's probably my favorite superhero character, and he did a series called The Untold Tales of Spider-Man, which basically told stories in between some of the early Stan Lee, Steve Ditko issues to kind of flesh out those stories a little bit more, and it was an excellent series. Great stuff.
All right. Now, you said earlier that you'd been dipping a little bit into Cull. So I'm assuming you've at least read The Shadow Kingdom, right?
I haven't read that one.
Oh,
no.
It's the one with the Snake Men conspiracy? Oh, you haven't?
Is that the one with Thulsa Doom in it?
No, that's a later one, but you really should read The Shadow Kingdom. It was the first Cull story, and it really is it is genuinely good. It is one of the best, and I think I may have accidentally given away the big twist, so I'm sorry for spoiling that for you.
Oh, no
Yeah,
worries. I'm not very concerned with spoilers generally most of the
yeah.
time, so you're good. I don't
Well,
mind.
yeah. Well, like I think I'm sure you've like heard about how like Del Rey has published these big collections of various Howard stories.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I've got like most of them on audiobook as well as like print editions, and so I'm pretty well versed in most of Howard's fantasy. Like I said, I keep wishing they would release like a collection of Howard's westerns because I would love to see Howard's take on a cowboy story. And especially if you look at some of his later Conan stories, particularly like Beyond the Black River, he was already sort of leaning in that direction.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the
Yeah.
Picts are just
Yeah.
Native Americans, you know.
Yep. And so anyway, yeah, I can definitely say that if you love Conan, I can heartily recommend pretty much any of his other sword and sorcery works. Cull is good, and but I also would recommend both Bron MacMorn and Solomon Kane. Those are also excellent and kind of underrated because Conan. There's a reason that he has this towering pop culture status, but I think the others deserve some love as well, frankly.
I've heard great things about Solomon Kane, and I find the premise to be um, very unique. Like you don't get a lot of Puritan heroes or like stories told during. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a very cool and unique setting and time period for a fantasy story.
I will say that this odd thing that sort of does set Conan apart from the rest is because unlike Conan, where it took like Howard a few tries before he really sort of figured out, this is what this is going to be. Like first, I'm like in just like the order of publishing. Let me quickly look that up. But anyway, all the other all the other Howard characters, Cull, Kane, and stuff, from like the very first pulp, they sort of just hit the ground running. And like I mentioned the Shadow Kingdom, that was the first Cull story, and it is a banger from beginning to end. And so let's see.
That's awesome.
And like Solomon Kane's first story is Red Shadows, and let me just give you like a quick summary of the introduction to how this story begins, because like they made a Solomon Kane movie starring Purefoy in 2009, right?
I was aware of that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've never seen it, but I've heard from a lot of people that they actually kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah, it is a good film. My only problems are one, Purefoy is just a little too baby faced to be Kane for me. Like if you've seen like just look up images of Solomon Kane, you're looking for a guy who looks kind of like Peter Cushing, like very gaunt, very hollow cheeked,
Interesting.
all angles. And the fact that it's an origin story that was never written by Howard. Solomon Kane, like most of Howard's characters, doesn't need an origin. He just needs a good introduction. And the introduction of Red Shadows, like the screenplay writes itself. It opens with Kane riding down this dark and lonely road, and then he sees, like in the distance, he sees the rising smoke, what looks but too big to be like hearth fire, so a village is burning. He rides in that direction. He then finds a pale damsel basically dying of a mortal wound lying against a tree. He goes to her side and asks what happened, and she basically reveals that these bandits burned down her village and raped and killed her, and then she dies, and you can just see it. Kane closes her eyes gently. He stands. He looks towards where the village is burning. And as the camera zooms in slowly on his face, he declares in a voice of iron, "Men shall die for this." Cut to opening credits.
That's great.
You want to know what Solomon Kane is about? That is all you need.
Yep.
And like nowadays, like Purefoy's older, I think he could fit the role of Kane much better now than he did in 2009.
Yeah,
he does perform well. I just don't think he quite matches what the character should look like.
right. No, that makes total sense. Kind of what you were saying about Momoa earlier.
Yeah. But again, this is me, nitpicking because the odds of getting like perfect casting in a live action film is nigh impossible if you're trying to adapt something.
Well, it's very true. I mean, you know how it is with Hollywood productions. Like,
It's also
they're not going to cast an ugly guy to
Yeah.
put on the poster.
Yeah, it's also kind of why I really love animation, because you can basically all you need is the perfect voice, and then you can make the character look whatever.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite iterations of Conan. They made an Xbox 360 game in 2006, I believe it was. And Ron Perlman is Conan's voice in that
Oh,
game,
that's
and I thought it fit really well. He was great
oh,
in the role.
that makes so much sense. But sort of as I was sort of saying earlier, with all the other like characters, Howard sort of hit the ground running from the very first pulp. With Conan, it took like a couple of tries because the Phoenix on the Sword was because like we're going by publishing order, not written order, because they're both a little different. Phoenix
Right.
on the Shore was the first one, on like December of 1932. And you know, as we all know, because like it's sort of famous, he basically rewrote an old Cull story by this axe I rule into the
Yes.
Phoenix on the Sword. And then he wrote the Scarlet Citadel in January of the following year. And like it's definitely good, but it's not quite what most people think of when they think Conan. But then March 1933, The Tower of the Elephant, and that is sort of like you like just the opening scene in because again like with Solomon Kane, the introduction of Tower of the Elephant immediately sells you what Conan is like. It's like in what's it called, Zamora, I think. Yeah, Zamora. It's in the bar in the mall, and like he gets into an argument with this Kothian kidnapper, and then kills him in like a deadly bar fight, and like
Right.
and like that's Conan right there.
Yep.
Like I think most people agree, like the Tower of the Elephant is really where Conan took off.
Well, I mean, again, talking about favorite Conan stories, of the early ones, I think that's probably my personal favorite. Because what I love about the Conan universe and as a fantasy universe, and one of the things that I tried to incorporate when I was creating my Legend of the Octonite fantasy series is Howard was not afraid to include things like extraterrestrials in this like
Yeah.
medieval, well, not even medieval. I mean, it's like prehistory fantasy world, you know.
The cover
Like I
art looks
love
amazing,
blending
by the
that
way.
stuff.
The cover art looks amazing, by the way,
Oh,
for the
thank you.
Octonite. So you know, again, another compliment you can pass on to Rodrigo for me.
Oh, definitely. Thank you. No, I'm glad. It's eye catching because I definitely you know, when I was describing what I wanted for the cover, you know, I wanted, you know, Menok, who's the main kind of purple alien guy there, the Octo Knight, and then the two Cyclopses. They're supposed to be fighting a Megalania, which is basically a giant prehistoric Komodo dragon that's like 250 pounds
Oh yeah,
and you know, obviously very long.
yeah.
So
Australian megafauna was weird way
yeah,
back when.
yeah, super weird, and kind of the vibe of this fantasy world is, in terms of like animals, is a lot of the prehistoric. You know, there's saber-tooth tigers and woolly mammoths and you know stuff like that running around. So, I described the scene of them fighting them, and I love the perspective he chose of you know the jaws of the Komodo dragon just right up in your face. It's came out really nice.
I mean, but like I said, the Tower of the Elephant really is where Conan really kicked in, where Howard finally sort of had a grasp of this guy as, you know, not just a Cull knockoff. He was his own fully realized thing, and he knew exactly how he was going to tell stories regarding this character. Because I mean, there's like it's just from there on, it's just nothing but bangers. Like after Tower of the Elephant comes Black Colossus, then
Yep.
Zuthal of the Dusk, then the Pool of the Black One, then Rogues in the House, which again is a personal favorite of mine. And again, it just keeps on getting better and better and better right up until his suicide. And it really just makes you wonder what might have been if he'd lived longer. Just how much more would his fantasy have gotten? It's kind of incredible.
Yeah, no, I mean, and one of the things that I often wonder is what Howard's legacy would have been if he kept writing. I mean, like he obviously is one of the most revered writers in like fantasy fandom circles.
I think the
But
only ones that match him would be, you know, Tolkien and Michael Moorcock.
yeah, no, totally. I do wonder if like he would have gained more sort of mainstream like recognition, I guess. Like even if you don't read Stephen King books, like people know who he is, you know what I
Oh
mean? That
yeah.
sort of thing. But I think Howard's one of those writers like, you know, his contributions to the specific, you know, fantasy genre and like, you know, some of the other stories he did, they're known and revered by the people that like them, and you know, people who are in the know that write fantasy know Robert E. Howard. But I feel like to most like regular people, even if they know who Conan is, they don't even necessarily know who Howard is. I do wonder if he would have become like more well known and in kind of the American literary canon even more so than he is now.
Yeah, that's the thing about speculation. It is pointless, but it's so much fun.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But yeah, I like I said earlier, I heartily recommend diving into the Howard's other sword and sorcery, and there's even it's like I think I mentioned this in the first stream. What Howard really wanted to do early on was he wanted to write historical fiction. Like again, that famous again, what I think is sort of this famous line from a letter he wrote: "There is nothing to me more zestful than rewriting history in the guise of fiction." And
Yep.
And we talked earlier about the origins of Red Sonja, and basically, even though like she was mostly a creation of Roy Thomas, there was a lot of of Howard's original pulp, because what they did was the character of Red Sonja came from another of Howard's one of Howard's early historical fiction stuff, and I think it was called The Wings of the Vulture. Let me look up to be certain, because I've got the information right in front of me. Let me see.
Yes, you are right about her being based on one of Howard's other characters.
Yeah, there was the name was from Wings of the Vulture, and then like the backstory that Thomas gave her, where Red Sonja is, I think, raped by what was it, a Turanian guy, and she then pledges herself to this goddess that she will never lie with a man who does not defeat her in honorable combat, something like that.
Yeah,
because I'm not as well versed in Red Sonja, because again she's mostly a comic thing. But that backstory has echoes of another female character that wrote called Dark Agnes, and he had a couple of stories that he devoted to her. Let me just look up the titles.
That's awesome. I should check those out at some point, because I do really like Red Sonja too. She's a cool character.
Yeah, they're Sword Woman, Blades for France, and The Mistress of Death.
Nice.
Yeah, and there's a big Del Rey collection of most of Howard's historical fiction that includes the Dark Agnes stories. The difference is that Agnes isn't raped, but she is basically forced into arranged marriage, and she escaped by killing the bridegroom.
Oh wow!
And then she's basically found by this fencing master who decides to take her on as an apprentice.
Right.
It's kind of a shame that, again, Howard was never able to go into historical fiction more, because he probably would have written a lot more about this character. And Dark Agnes is genuinely pretty good. It's obviously not one of his best, but that's because he didn't have was never given enough opportunity and time to really develop her the way he did Conan or Kane.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen, if he ever got a chance to write like the stories of Belit before she met Conan or something too. Like that would have been really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's not part of the official Dark Horse run, I think, but there was like a Dark Horse comic at one point that sort of explored the storyline in between Conan meeting Belit and that fateful thing where they go up the river to the place where the weird bat ape man thing lives and kills her.
Yes, you are right about that. I believe also in the main Marvel comic series, they do kind of fill in some of the gaps in the pulp story with stuff.
I mean, you could seriously do like a mini series just on the Queen of the Black Coast alone, because it's left deliberately vague how long the two are together. So you could put it. There's just like that brief aside where they talk about the reputation they gain and how they terrorize the coasts of Stygia and the Black Kingdoms, and so you could put in all kinds of adventures in there.
Oh, absolutely. And when they adapt that story in the Marvel comics, they do exactly that. I don't know exactly how many issues it is, but it's a long portion. Once you get into the middle of Roy Thomas's run on that book, and John Buscema's firing on all cylinders, they take their time with it, which is really cool.
Mm. Well, one, I'm a little tired. My throat's starting to dry out from all the talking. So, unless you've got anything else to talk about, I think we can end it here. This was a fun stream.
It was, yeah. I'd love to be able to do it again soon, man. I always enjoy talking with you, and always up to talk more, fantasy, our own projects, history, all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, the only thing I have to say, I guess, is I'll say the second issue of Star Spangled Tales, we're aiming to release the Kickstarter for that around March or April. The art for it should be done by mid-February, so I want to take a little bit of time to kind of put the promotional materials together for it, like um, like we did a poster last time. We did some stickers. We did all the different variant covers. I'll put all that together, and we'll be launching the Kickstarter. And then I don't have a timetable on when Legend of the Octonite will be drawn. I'm hoping to get the Star Spangled Tales first arc done first, because I want to retain the audience for that book. I don't want to spend too much time between each issue. 3 months is honestly more than I would have liked, but just given the budget constraints and Rodrigo's ability to physically draw the issue, we've had to wait a little while, mostly because of me, and I can only pay him so much per week to draw pages. So the way I'm doing these is I'm funding them all up front, so I can have all of the art to show people during the campaign, and then make as much money back as we can on the back end. So that's where we're at with all of my writing projects. I'd like to be able to get back to the Conan Chronicles series at some point, because I only have a couple of the Howard stories left to talk about, and I'd like to. I had planned on doing a Conan in comics, like separate kind of video essay series going through both the Marvel main series and the Savage Sword series, and some of the other ancillary stuff. Like I was reading some of the recent Dynamite Red Sonja stuff. I would like to be able to do some videos on that. So I've got a lot cooking, and I hope you guys, if you're kind enough to check it out, that you enjoy it.
Yeah, well, you've got like a Facebook and an Instagram, right?
I do, yes.
Yeah, that's where you're promoting Star Spangled Tales.
Yes, and I'll, most likely do a social media page for Legend of the Octonite when we're getting ready to launch that too as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, best of luck, man.
Thank you.
As for me, like I said earlier, the first issue of Babylon Rocker will be released sometime near the end of January. The digital copies will be out in the middle of the month, but the physical copies will probably be late January, early February. Hopefully, I'll be able to, do this in a timely fashion and, honor my Kickstarter promises. Because with me, I basically had to raise money just to be able to pay the artist. Which is kind of why it's taken longer to get done than yours seems to have. But anyway, I'm going to start pushing Babylon Rocker real hard, because now that we've got some of the line work, I'm going to use that as big promotional material, as well as a few of the concepts. So
great.
Like I believe you advised on the initial stream, I just need to be really obnoxious and just not shut up about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, yeah, in the lead up to this, I'm just going to be pushing Babylon Rocker issue 1 hard.
Awesome.
I'm also in the midst of like writing letters for literary agents to try and promote my 3 books that I've already written, and I'm also starting on a 4th novel. Haven't got a name for it yet, but I think it's gonna be interesting. It's sort of a very much an homage to Howardian sword and sorcery.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's great to hear.
And like I said, I've got like the books available on my website. All 3 of them in physical and digital, and 2 in digital and 1 in audiobook form. And hopefully soon I'm going to be able to argue my way through Audible's ridiculous terms of service to be able to sell the audio versions on their site.
Oh, yeah.
So like we're both being very busy bees this year.
Yeah, no, best of luck with you to you with the Audible stuff. I guess I should have realized, but I didn't even realize there were all kinds of crazy like requirements and stuff.
Uh-huh. Well, I guess that's it. To those few of you who tuned in, thank you very much, and I hope you have a good night.
Yeah, good night, guys. Thanks for watching.
And okay, that's that. Yeah, have a good night.